Yeah, so we're going to talk about ossiculoplasty, but I just wanted to mention this course that you've already heard about that John and I organise in Villars in Switzerland. It's a great opportunity to improve your otological knowledge and also brush up on your skiing. Basically, we have lectures first thing in the morning, ski all day, lectures in the evening. It's a very cheap course. Pretty much the cost of the course is returned to you in your free ski pass and in something called beer. So I'd highly recommend it to you. And if you're interested, you can chat to me. I've got some flyers. Right, so. Okay, so we're going to call the talk Ossiculoplasty, Why Bother? This is Windsor. This is Windsor Castle. So I work in Windsor, and Windsor Castle, Windsor's just to the west of London, quite near Heathrow. And Windsor Castle is the largest inhabited castle in the world. It was begun at the end of the 11th century by William the Conqueror. And Windsor is pretty much the first elevated area on the Thames to the west of London, so it was always a good strategic place. And over the years, it's been added to, including the amazing chapel here. And the private hospital where I work is just about here. This is Windsor Great Park. And this is one of the most beautiful Gothic buildings in the UK. And just across the river from Windsor is Eton, so just the other side of the Thames. And Eton College is a famous school in the UK. It was set up in 1440 by Henry VI. And it was originally set up as a school for children of poor people. So initially it was for 70 poor children, and the idea is that they'd be trained at this school and then they would go to King's College, Cambridge, which was set up also by Henry VI. And not much has changed really, it's still a school for very poor children. Sufficiently poor that our two princes attended the school. It's also been the school that educated 19 of our prime ministers, including our current prime minister, but not for very long. And actually, the person who's been responsible for his downfall, and we thought perhaps was going to be the next Prime Minister, is this chap, Boris Johnson. And he was responsible for the Brexit campaign, but we heard yesterday he's not going to stand to be Prime Minister. So what's Brexit all about? You know, it wasn't very long ago that we were very friendly with our French counterparts. Here's David Cameron with Hollande having a beer. And you can see that they're having a great time, really friendly. And here's David with Angela Merkel, and again, there was a bit of a love-in. But then things seemed to suddenly turn a little bit sour. And over the years, people have fallen out. And it's partly because of this, really. This is how the Brits see Europe, the evil federated empire of Europe. And really, you know, we've been pretty concerned over the years. Very good. So as a result of that, there's been a sort of growing feeling that actually we didn't want to be part of Europe. And before our last election, David Cameron promised us a vote. And in the run-up to the vote, this is what he was beginning to think, that the Brexit was beginning to cut him off from Europe. So we had our vote last week, as you know, and the vast majority of the young people wanted to stay in, so they were devastated that we were leaving. And this is the sort of people who've decided that we're going to leave, older and uneducated people. You see how happy the old people are. But this is what it was like in London last week after the vote. So death and destruction. So it was nice to come down here for some sunshine. But we are lucky because although we are very disappointed, John and I are absolutely devastated about the fact that we might be leaving, we've got some very, very important, influential supporters around the world who are very happy. So the great Donald Trump, and of course that perhaps happiest of all is Vladimir Putin. Okay, so I often have ossiculoplasty, why bother, and show the picture of Windsor, but this is Slough, this is the sewage works. So the hospital equally just a little bit further north, that's the NHS hospital where I work, Wexham Park Hospital. Not a bad spot. So I tend to use the Windsor picture rather than the Slough picture for obvious reasons. Now we have some unusual problems working in ear surgery in Windsor that very few people have. Okay, so we're going to briefly look at the history of hearing restoration. And remarkably, in the 19th century, there were some outstanding surgeons who started looking at improving hearing by working on the stapes and chopping out bits of the tympanic membrane. So the first stapes mobilization was in 1876. And these were pretty big series in the 19th century. You know, 200 stapes mobilizations, 60, and 200 stapes mobilizations, no dead ears, no dead patients, 60% improving hearing. Quite remarkable. And we sometimes moan about our microscopes not being quite perfect and the camera's not great, but this is the sort of thing they were using, oxygen hydrogen lamps with a reflective mirror. This sort of setup where you've got a speculum and a mirror. And although this is a dental procedure, this is sort of how it works. So quite incredible that they were doing stapes surgery. This is from a 1901 textbook. So they've got all these tiny instruments. This is before microscopes. You can see most of the instruments are designed to avulse the ossicular chain. And then it all stopped at the turn of the century into the 20th century. And it's slightly hidden in mystery exactly why that was. But Politzer, who was hugely influential at the time, said that the operations for improving hearing were useless and dangerous. And I guess it's probable that most of the surgeons who were trying it were not getting the same results that Mio and Boucheron were getting. So maybe there were some deaths, perhaps, I don't know. But if you think about it, it was probably pretty difficult. What's happening now? Sorry. Yeah, so by the early 20th century, this is a big book, two-volume textbook about surgery of the temporal bone, and they're no longer talking about surgery of hearing restoration. It's completely gone off the agenda. And this is 1930. It's a 600-page textbook, less than 1 page on deafness. These operations mentioned for their place in otological history are quite obsolete today. So they suddenly stopped doing anything for hearing restoration. And why was that? Well, that's basically because these guys were very busy ear surgeons, and they were busy draining mastoids, and they were doing that because people were dying from mastoiditis. So look at this. As a life-saving measure, few surgical procedures equal, and none surpass in efficiency the modern mastoid operation, 1905. This is Sir William Wilde. He's the father of our famous author, Oscar Wilde, and he was a surgeon based in Ireland, in Dublin, and he was the first one to drain a mastoid abscess. And we heard yesterday about Schwarzer with a simple mastoidectomy and Zaufel with his radical mastoidectomy. So these were life-saving operations, and they weren't bothered about hearing restoration. And then in the 20s, the Swedes came up with the operating microscope, initially a monocular and then a binocular microscope, and that changed the game completely. Suddenly we could see what we were doing. And by the 50s, the Germans were looking at repairing tympanic membranes, and then we had Wulstein looking at actually bridging the gaps in the ossicular chain, so ossiculoplasty. And then it really took off. We've got binocular microscopes, we've got antibiotics, we can see what we're doing, and suddenly hearing restoration became important. And we know about Wulstein's classification, so this is a bit like a Moringoplasty, a type 1. Type 2, Type 2 we're doing much less often nowadays. This is where they used to amputate the malleus handle and drop the tympanic membrane down onto the long process of the incus. Type 3 we see quite a lot, where we actually go straight to the head of the stapes. Type 4 down onto a mobile footplate, and if you get that, and if you can get a baffle effect, if you can screen off the round window, you get pretty good hearing with that. And type 5 we don't do anymore, with a fenestration of the canal. And then further development through the 50s. So what do we use? What can we use for our ossiculoplasties? Well, we have obviously incus. We can use other bone, malleus head, cortical bone, and cartilage. So these are the autografts that we use. And worldwide, incus transposition is probably the most commonly performed. It's locally available, it's well tolerated. There are some possibilities of it ankylosing over time. It needs to be carefully sculpted, but a lot of people will do this. There was talk some time ago about whether you should put an incus back in if it's been in contact with cholesteatoma. But I think I've never met anyone who's put in an incus that's actually grown cholesteatoma from within it. So I think that's probably not a problem. but it does require skillful carving. Homographs, we used to use homographs in the UK back in the 70s and 80s, but then they were banned because of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But we've got a couple of people here from Belgium, I think, and they still use homographs in Belgium. So they have a bank of ossicles that they can turn to, and they even have complete assemblies of tympanic membrane with a full ossicular chain that you can implant. And apparently they work very well. But it does allow you to do remarkable things like this double-decker stapes reconstruction, which I would love to do, where you balance one stapes on another. But we don't have them. So we tend to use a lot of prosthetics, and these are the materials that we can use. And there's been a move over the years towards bioactive ceramics, so particularly hydroxyapatite, because that sits very nicely under the tympanic membrane. And that last prosthesis that we saw Renault use was along the lines of this one with a central groove. We can use cements, so glass ionomeric or hydroxyapatite cements. Or we can use metals, and the metal of choice at the moment is titanium because it's well tolerated in the middle ear. So the title of the talk was Why Bother? And I guess the bottom line here is that the results from ossiculoplasty are pretty variable. And we heard yesterday that we should be reporting our good results within 15 dB. Some people will say within 20 dB. Very few people report their ossiculoplasty results as being successful only if they're less than 10 dB. And yet with stapes surgery, that's exactly what we do. So why do we have different success from ossiculoplasty and stapes? Why do we set the bar at a different level? And that's basically, if you set it at 10 decibels, you end up with disappointing results. So we set the bar that makes us feel good. As we know, the surgery is quite challenging. You've just seen the last case with Renault, and that was quite a tricky case. We know that ears may not be stable over the long term, so the long-term results are usually not as good. And then we have the opposition, the hearing aids and bone-anchored hearing aids. And hearing aids are undoubtedly improving. They've got a lot better over the years. And then finally, we're going to look a little bit at stapedotomy. So this is the latest that we've got on the NHS. With Brexit, we've got no money, and this is what we're currently providing our patients with. This one comes with its own hat to conceal the hearing aid, and it seems impossible that this head-hugging hat can conceal a 940, but it's true. And here you can see one of our patients, very happy little chap. But the patients often think that's what they're going to get. So there is a natural resistance with our patients in the UK about having hearing aids. But of course, modern hearing aids are completely different. They're generally open fitting. You can have them that go right down the canal, completely invisible. And these sort of things are very comfortable and light, and patients don't even know they're wearing them. So we're competing against that. Now they're no longer hearing aids. They're personal communication assistants. They link into your phone with Bluetooth. And interestingly, in New Zealand, they're sold with a sort of slightly sexual, raunchy, this is Widex in New Zealand. To hear no evil would be a bit of a shame. If you're going to be talked about, you might as well hear what they say. So I was quite surprised this was New Zealand, actually, but there you go. So what affects our results? Well, these things. And amongst those things, there's surgical skill and there's the prosthesis, but there's lots of other things, and that's why our results are poor compared to stapedectomy, because we quite frequently have problems with the eustachian tube. We quite frequently have concurrent infection, poor mucosal status. So an ear like that, much as I tried, that's going to be hard to get right until we can sort the eustachian tube out. And we heard yesterday about how these can be graded in various different ways. This is the middle ear risk index from Jack Cartouche from the States, where he gives values to these various things. And if you get a score of 0, you got a pretty good ear, and if you got a score of 12, you got a terrible ear. And so, if you got a really high score on that, the chances of getting a successful result are very poor. And of course we have to look at the prosthesis, but it's only in that general scheme of things that if you want to get really good results from ossicular surgery, you should pick good ears, nicely ventilated ears with good drums with isolated ossicular defects. But these things are important. How it sits, whether it's stable, its length, weight, reactivity. And stability is very important, and I think this demonstrates it very well. This is in Ireland. And of course you can see what happens. So you need to be more stable. This is some work that Manohar Bans did, looking at the length of the prosthesis and whether it should go under the tympanic membrane or under the malleus. And his conclusion was that you get better hearing results if you're under the malleus, and you also get better hearing results if you put a relatively shorter prosthesis in. So he was asking, this was done on temporal bones with laser vibrometry, but basically what he asked the surgeons to do was put in the shortest prosthesis you felt gave connection, a prosthesis that was the longest that you felt without the chance of dislocating the stapes, and one in between. And when he looked at the results from the hearing perspective, the shorter ones tended to do better. But obviously if it's that little bit too short, then it's not going to work at all. So that's, you know, where experience comes in.
I'm going to talk about.
Okay. So one of the things we need to think with our patients, it's all very well to say, oh, well, you know, we like the surgery and there's a chance it's going to work, but what are the chances of it not working and what are the risks? So failure to work, that depends very much on the status of the ear. But we can make the hearing worse. We can give our patients a dead ear. Fortunately, that's uncommon, but it's not that it never happens. And this is one we talked about yesterday, alteration in taste. And my experience with this is that patients who get good hearing results don't mind too much if the cord is damaged. Generally, fortunately for us, if they have alteration in taste, it does improve over time. Tinnitus, I usually tell the patients that if the surgery is successful from their hearing point of view, about 70% are going to get an improvement in their tinnitus, about 30% it will be unchanged, and about 1% it will be worse. And vertigo, of course, we have to mention. So we're now going to look at specific situations, and this is one of the commonest we see with an erosion of the long process of the incus. And when I started off, I used to use this apple-bound prosthesis, which is hydroxyapatite, but I could never get it to sit very well, and my results were a bit rubbish with that. And then I went through a period when I was using cement, and it's interesting, we were hearing from Muaz yesterday that he's using more and more cement, and I think there's probably a little bit, depends what cement you use, and we might talk about that this afternoon. But I went through a period where I used quite a bit of cement, so this is a fractured incus, and I was told that basically what you needed to do was denude the incus and stapes head of mucosa, so I used to just gently laser it. And then this is glass ionomeric cement, and you can end up with a very nice looking reconstruction. Unfortunately, in my hands, I found that the short-term results were good, but the long-term results were a little bit poor, and so I stopped using it after a while. But I know that there are a lot of people out there who feel cement's a very useful thing. And here, you can get a very nice looking incus and stapes, and that seemed to work well. But because their results were not great, I stopped using it. I think it's important if you use it that you wait, you resist the temptation to fiddle with it, you leave it alone until it's nice and stable. Just playing up a bit, sorry. Okay. And then this is the Winkle clip that we looked at, which, and then we've got a PORP here. Yeah, sorry. Okay, and that's a PORP with an HA head just sitting under the drum. So in the last case, we saw a malleus relocation, and the reason people relocate the malleus is that if you do a reconstruction from the stapes to the malleus, the further anterior the malleus is, and the more medial the tympanic membrane is, the less vertical is the reconstruction. So if you relocate your malleus and put it directly over the top, like we saw Renaud do, you should get a better hearing result. And so just to go through what he's done, what you need to do is you need to completely separate the malleus from the tympanic membrane. And the difficult bit of that is going around the umbo. And then you divide the tensor tympani, and using a heavy hook high up here on the malleus, not down here where you'll fracture the malleus, but up here, you pull it posteriorly and you stretch the anterior ligament. And then you can place the malleus directly over the stapes. So here you see it sitting directly over the stapes head. And then you can use a prosthesis with a central groove. And the one that we saw was actually the Grace Medical one, which we'll look at in a little bit. And you can use this in the presence you see here that in the presence of a stapes, just like Renaud did, and you can put this rubber band around the neck of the stapes to stabilize it all. So here it's sitting, and then put the rubber band underneath. So I'm not sure why the video is not working. Hopefully they'll work. So I'm just stabilizing the head and then just flicking the rubber band underneath the stapedius tendon. And that sits and it's nice and stable. And that's even without the malleus on top. And then I'll just see the other one. Yep, so the same thing. You just basically slip the, if you leave the stapedius tendon long, it just stops the rubber band slipping off. Yeah. Okay, and here's one with a relocated malleus and the HA head sitting nicely underneath it. Actually, just hang on a second. Sorry about this. I just need sound. But I'll just do it with the microphone. It's okay. I think it'll be okay with this. I hope. Okay. So, but one of the things that I think you saw that a little bit with Renaud, that actually doing that rubber band is not that easy. There's a slight worry when you pop it underneath the stapedius tendon. After a while, you get used to it. But one of the most scary things in otology is teaching a trainee to do it. And I always feel it's a little bit like this, actually, when I've got a trainee doing that.
Dangerous part of the act.
And the doors are open! And the head is in! Bounce!
So I always feel a little bit like that when I've got a trainee doing it.
It's a very pleasant thing to look at.
It's not. No, okay. Well. So I moved over to this. Wilco Grollman told me about this thing. This is the Kurtz Dresden clip. And this has got this very nice little clip that sits onto the head of the stapes. The clip's asymmetric. It's got different bits at different points. And so when you put it in, there's a correct way of putting it. You have to line up a little crosshatch with the stapedius tendon. That's the little crosshatch. And you line that up, and you just push it on. And this is really simple. So, in that last case, you could have put one of these in very quickly. They are of a fixed length, so you have to decide which length you're going to put in first. But once they're on, and they slip on very nicely, they're very stable. They don't come off. One of the main disadvantages of them is that they're very easy to put on, so the trainees can put them on. Which is slightly disappointing sometimes that they find it very easy. But generally speaking, things that are easy are good. And this is in a combined approach, so we put a bit of cartilage over the top. But I really like this prosthesis. And having spent years trying all sorts of different things, I've been using this probably for the last 4 or 5 years.
Chris?
I'm very satisfied with the results.
Do you mind a question? Or
No, fine, far away.
Just the downward pressure on the stapes when you put that, how does it feel? It
feels
like
fine. It feels absolutely fine.
It's not too much pressure?
No, that's why I particularly like this clip, because I think it's sufficiently soft that it just goes over. There are different clips on the market which are a bit stiffer, and I don't like them, but I think it's very good.
Have you ever had a chat with them about coating it in hydroxylapatite?
The head?
Yeah.
Well, they're here, so you can
right.
do that. But yeah, I mean, that would be...
It would save the cartilage.
It would save the cartilage, for sure, for sure. But when I looked at my results, basically, I get better results with the Dresden clip than I do with anything else, and it's definitely the simplest prosthesis. And I think compared to a Bell prosthesis, it just sits much, much better. So particularly what's impressive is the improvement in less than 10 decibel air bone gap. And obviously, a little bit your results depend what cases you do, but I tend to be quite aggressive with the ossiculoplasty, so I'm operating on some pretty bad ears. So that for me, if you've got a stapes, I think I would use it. I would try that clip. I'd really recommend it to you. And I think you'll find it's simple and good results. The difficulty for me is what you do when you don't have a stapes. And I've used a whole variety of things. I've used this Variac system. It's quite nice because you get dummies, and you can adjust the length of the prosthesis. It's got a nice fenestrated head so you can see where you're putting it. But fundamentally, the problem with a TORP is that it's not stable laterally and it's not stable medially. And I always tell the patients it's a bit like balancing a pin on a plate, and it doesn't take much for that to fall over. So this is the Variac system. These are the dummies, and you can pop a dummy into the ear. They're in 0.5 millimeter lengths, but you can adjust the prosthesis to 1/4 millimeter lengths, and you place it into these little pre-formed holes of different depths. And then you crimp the platform, and that will hold the shaft in place. So you put your dummy in, and sometimes I'll do these under local, and you put the dummy in, and the patient says, "Oh, that's fantastic, brilliant, brilliant hearing." And then you go and cut the prosthesis to the right length, and you put it in, and they say, "Oh no, it's not as good. It's not as good." Yeah, do more under general. Yeah. So you push the shaft down to the bottom of the hole, and then you can see there's a little curve here on this prosthesis, and you have a special tool that crimps that, and that just nips the shaft in place. It just tightens up just here.
Can you over crimp this?
I don't think so. No, the tool is designed that it only crimps to a certain point, and then you just cut off the excess. And that's designed that it leaves a tiny little bit of the shaft sticking up, and that will locate into your cartilage that you put on top of it. So I think it's quite a neat system. It's adjustable. You only need the one in your cupboard. Put a bit of cartilage underneath. But it doesn't fundamentally address the problem with stability both medially and laterally. So, you put that in, you put the cartilage back, it all looks very nice, but it wouldn't take much for that to fall over. Okay, so the question is there anything you can do to improve the stability? And lots of people have looked at this. So some of the prostheses will fit into this Dornhofer shoe. This is the Omega connector that sits on the foot plate. And this is a cartilage punch which cuts a piece of cartilage with a hole. So if we look at the Omega connector, which I have used, it's a fabulous piece of engineering. It's an incredibly small little ball joint. And I gave this lecture to a bunch of engineers, and they were very interested in the surgery, but far more interested in how do you make that. And it's cut out with a laser, but it's absolutely tiny. And then you put the prosthesis, which has got a little cup underneath, so that it sits on top of that little ball. And the idea is that it allows a little bit of movement, so if the prosthesis just moves a bit with the drum, then it's not going to fall over. But as someone was saying yesterday, the little Omega connector can twist a bit like your ankle, so you have to make sure that it's nicely positioned. And when it gets wet, it sticks to things. It can be quite a fiddle to use it. Yep. I do, but I think you saw yesterday somebody was actually putting a little bit of fluid underneath the base of the cup and then putting the thing on together. But I usually put it in place, make sure I've got it nicely in place, and then put that on top. You don't need much downward pressure at all, actually. No.
Chris, once it's connected, is it a click fit, or will it come apart again?
It's not a click fit, so it comes apart. And I guess that's one of the worries, that they just come apart. One of the ideas is that it allows the eardrum, if the eardrum comes up a little bit, there's a little bit of movement there, so it allows the prosthesis to move up and down without necessarily displacing. So this is Robert's invention, which I like. It's a malleus replacement prosthesis, and you locate this in the scutum by drilling holes, and now you've got something that's stable laterally, and it allows you to stabilize your prosthesis. And if you combine that with the prosthesis that we've just seen, that Renault used, this is the Vincent Alto from Grace Medical, so it's got an adjustable length. You push this up and down, then... sorry. Well, you can see basically what you can do. Technology. Okay. So basically you can adjust that length and then you snip it to length. And then for the actual MRP, you drill holes through the scutum. So you go right through the scutum. The hole right through, and then you put your prosthesis in so you can make sure you know where the other hole should be. And then you push these 2 feet through the holes, and they're nice and malleable, these joints, so it allows you to bend it into position. And you push that nice and snug against the bone. And then you can bend the shaft of it. So you can put that directly over your foot plate. And then we've got a prosthesis here that you can locate underneath the... You can locate that central groove underneath the neomalleus. And then you've got much more stability laterally here than you would have otherwise. And that's one of the real problems, I think. And this prosthesis will actually fit onto an Omega shoe medially if you wish. So I know Robert's done a lot of these and the results are good. You have to put cartilage because this is titanium, so you put a little sliver of cartilage over it and under the drum. And then finally, sometimes if the ear is nicely ventilated, I will actually do a stapedotomy through a mobile foot plate and do a malleus stapes assembly or even an incus stapes assembly. But there are not that many ears that you can do that. You've got to feel that you've got a very stable middle ear that is not going to retract. But of course, if you can do that, then your results are going to be better than anything because you're nicely secured both laterally and medially, and your results are going to very closely mimic a normal stapedotomy. So if you look at the results, you might say it's unfair to compare these because the ears, by definition, are a bit more healthy, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But basically, my results are best with the Omega shoe. Well, they're best with stapedotomy, but of the others, it's best with the Omega shoe. So with the stapedotomy, you get pretty good results. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to our course that we do at Wexham Park. We've got a purpose-built temporal bone lab. You can guarantee to be happy if you come on the course. You can see everybody has a great time. What we do there is we give you these prostheses to play with. So all the companies provide them. You can do laser stapedotomy, so you can play with lots of tools. We've got cement, we've got otoendoscopes, and the next course is in May. So if you're interested in that, come and speak to me. And then the final thing I'd like to do is promote LION. So you know about LION, the Live International Otolaryngology Network that John and Robert set up and I've been involved with for some time. And we do live streaming of surgery. So we do these procedures live for audiences of 6,000-10,000, which is a lot of fun, but sometimes there are problems with doing live internet surgery. In fact, anything live on the internet can be problematic.
Hi, babe.
The Sony Vaio notebook.
Okay, so thanks for your attention.
So thanks very much, Chris. I can't speak highly enough of Chris's course. It is very good because the ratio of, well, it says a young and active faculty. I don't think most of us are young anymore. We're still active. But the ratio of faculty to people who are drilling and putting the prosthesis is very good. So you can be sure if you have a problem that there will be a member of the faculty who will come and help you within 2 or 3 minutes. So it is a great course to go on. And of course, so is the winter one, which you're all more than welcome to come to. And Chris will give you some flyers later if you're interested. Okay, I think we're having...
Any questions?
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment about the use of cement. I think it's not a good idea to vaporize the mucosa. I'm actually very, very happy with a thickened mucosa. And I think of the cement as something that put together these two bones. I think if you freeze the incus into the stapes, which move in a very, as we know, move in a very different directions, you end up really reducing the success of your audiologic results. And I I actually, at the end of the procedure, I really tap the joint very, very hard to try to create some sort of displacement between the cement matrix and the two bones. And I've learned that trick from the...
Okay, so you're hoping to have a joint at each position,
exactly.
recreate a joint.
Yeah.
I mean, that may well be why it works. I think some of the cements have been shown over time to fall off, unfortunately.
Are there some limitations to malleus relocation? For example, if there was tympanosclerotic fixation of the attic of the malleus in the attic, or if you had to remove the malleus head as part of a cholesteatoma procedure.
Yeah, I don't do this anymore because I just use that clip, but you can't really do it if you're doing cholesteatoma surgery and you've amputated the head of the malleus because it's basically suspended on that superior ligament. So if you've got no head and you divide the tensor and you've got it off the drum and you've pulled the anterior ligament, there's nothing holding it. It's free then, pretty much. So I think it works if you've got the head intact. I mean, I guess if the attic's completely full of tympanosclerosis, it might be difficult to do it. Yeah.
I mean, there's not much blood supply coming into the malleus either once you've done all this relocation. So if you've been too violent and ruptured everything, you can get some necrosis of the malleus. So you have to be careful.
Structures necrosis after with a rubber band.
With the rubber band, well, Robert will tell you that because he's done a lot more than I have. I mean, I've not seen that. And the rubber bands, particularly this new rubber band on the Grace prosthesis, is nice and flexible. So I think that's probably unlikely. And likewise with that clip, I've not seen it cause any necrosis. And people have asked about the clip, with it being titanium and potentially osseointegrating, is it difficult to take it off if you need to? And the answer to that is not at all. It's very easy. The foil feet are very soft and pliable, and they just peel off.
Do you also use the clip prosthesis when there's still part of the lenticular process on top of it, or when the head of the malleus is a little bit eroded?
Head of the malleus, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm the stapes.
Oh, the stapes, yeah. I think if the stapes head is eroded, it doesn't always clip on. If there's a little bit of lenticular process like that last case, it would have been fine for that. It would fit on that. So I don't think it matters if there's a tiny bit of incus on top, but if you've got no head, it doesn't really clip properly onto the crura. It needs to go around the head.